A modern human placed in a Viking winter would not die from cold. They would die from energy mismanagement. Cold doesn't kill instantly, it drains calories, attention, and discipline until mistakes compound into collapse. That's where most people fail. You think you'd survive because you've been uncomfortable before, but discomfort with an exit is not the same as cold that doesn't negotiate. The Vikings didn't survive winter because they were tougher. They survived because they understood something we've forgotten. The human body is a heat engine that runs on discipline, not willpower. This is not a story about warriors, gods, or raids. This is about survival systems built by people who lived in an environment that punished every error with immediate consequences. No rescue protocols, no second chances, no comfort layer to catch you when judgment fails. What you're about to hear isn't mythology wrapped in modern self-help language. It's engineering, biological, behavioral, and environmental. The Vikings developed methods that worked when failure meant death. And those methods were so effective, they became invisible. We mistake their survival for genetic advantage or cultural mythology when it was actually just relentless optimization of energy management. This video deconstructs one specific system, how they maintained core temperature in an environment designed to drain it. Northern Scandinavia was not merely cold, it was a sustained assault on human homeostasis. For months, sunlight was minimal to non-existent, disrupting circadian regulation and vitamin D synthesis. Temperatures hovered consistently below freezing, sometimes dropping to -20 or 30 degrees Celsius. Agriculture stopped entirely between October and April. Food had to be stored, preserved, and rationed, not grown on demand. Heat had to be managed as a finite resource, not generated casually. The environment didn't care about effort, courage, or intention. It only responded to efficiency. Every calorie burned had to justify itself. Every movement had to serve a purpose. The cold wasn't cruel, it was indifferent, which is far more dangerous. Cruelty can be negotiated. Indifference simply measures energy expenditure against energy input and kills you when the equation fails. The Viking winter was a continuous thermodynamic problem with no room for waste. The human body is inefficient in cold environment, and modern humans are especially vulnerable. We lose heat through exposed skin at a rate that accelerates in wind and moisture. We burn calories faster as the body diverts energy to maintain a core temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. Cognitive performance drops as blood flow shifts away from extremities and the prefrontal cortex toward vital organs. Decision-making deteriorates. Fine motor control weakens. The ability to assess risk becomes compromised exactly when risk assessment matters most. Modern humans are catastrophically dependent on external systems. We rely on central heating to regulate temperature, constant food access to maintain energy levels, stable light cycles to govern sleep, and insulated infrastructure to eliminate exposure. Remove those supports, and the system collapses within days, not weeks. We have outsourced thermoregulation so completely that our bodies no longer practice. The result is comfort in the short term and fragility in the long term. A power outage in winter becomes a survival scenario. The Vikings lived in permanent power outage. Vikings didn't fight the cold, they managed energy loss with surgical precision. Their first principle was insulation that worked while wet, which is where most modern materials fail catastrophically. Wool was not a fashion choice or a cultural artifact. It was survival technology. Unlike cotton, synthetics, or untreated plant fibers, wool retains insulating properties even when damp. Snow melts against skin. Sweat forms during exertion. Moisture is inevitable. Wool continues to trap air pockets and slow conductive heat loss even when saturated. This is due to the crimped structure of wool fibers and the lanolin coating that repels water at a microscopic level. Vikings layered wool in multiple thin sheets rather than one thick layer, creating air gaps that acted as thermal buffers. The outer layer would wet and freeze, forming a windproof shell. The inner layers stayed dry enough to insulate. This wasn't accidental, it was engineered through generations of trial and elimination. Their second layer of defense was fat, both worn and eaten. Animal fat, seal, whale, bear was rendered and applied to clothing and skin. This created a hydrophobic barrier that slowed moisture transfer and added another insulating layer. Internally, fat became the primary macronutrient. A single gram of fat delivers 9 calories, more than twice the energy density of carbohydrates or protein. In an environment where carrying capacity was limited and caloric demand was extreme, fat was the only fuel that made sense. They consumed it in quantities that would horrify modern nutritionists. Rendered fat mixed with dried fish, fat poured over preserved food, fat eaten plain. This wasn't excess, it was calculation. Third principle: Controlled exposure. Vikings did not seek constant warmth. They moved between cold and heat deliberately, cycling between outdoor work and indoor recovery. This trained vascular response, the ability to constrict blood vessels in cold, to preserve core heat, and dilate them in warmth to dissipate excess. Cold tolerance is not genetic inheritance. It's physiological adaptation built through repeated, controlled stress. The body learns to shunt blood more efficiently, to shiver less wastefully, to maintain cognitive function under thermal load. Modern humans avoid this training entirely, which is why we feel cold at temperatures Vikings would have considered mild. Heat is not about temperature, it's about energy preservation. By minimizing moisture accumulation, insulating efficiently even when wet, and training the body to tolerate thermal fluctuation, Vikings reduced the caloric cost of simply existing. Less energy wasted on thermoregulation meant more energy available for cognition, injury repair, immune function, and sustained labor. Their advantage wasn't physical strength or genetic superiority. It was thermodynamic efficiency. They turned survival into an engineering problem and solved it by refusing to waste energy on comfort. Every decision was evaluated against a single question. Does this preserve or consume calories? If it consumed more than it returned, it was eliminated. None of this looks like technology by modern standards. There were no machines, no tools with moving parts, no devices that required maintenance. The technology was behavioral, embedded into daily routines so completely it became invisible. Clothing choices weren't aesthetic decisions but calculated responses to predicted thermal load. Daily routines weren't arbitrary traditions but optimized energy distribution protocol. Meal timing, work cycles, sleep pattern, even social gathering, all of it was structured around energy management. Intentional discomfort wasn't punishment or character building. It was training. The body adapts to what it practices, and Vikings practiced cold exposure the way athletes practice movement pattern. The technology was the system itself, a way of life that treated the human body as a biological machine requiring specific inputs and maintenance schedule. Survival in Viking winter wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and the two were inseparable. Routine acted as a cognitive anchor against the destabilization of endless dark and cold. When the environment provides no external rhythm, the mind creates internal structure or deteriorate. Vikings imposed strict routines. Wake at the same time, work in defined blocks, eat at fixed intervals, sleep according to protocol. This wasn't rigidity for its own sake. It was regulation. The predictability of routine reduces cognitive load, preserves decision-making capacity, and prevents the drift into apathy that kills as surely as hypothermia. Work repetitive, physical, necessary became a psychological stabilizer. Repairing tools, processing food, maintaining shelters. Tasks that generated tangible progress created a sense of agency in an environment that otherwise stripped agency away. Community wasn't optional social nicety. It was distributed cognition. When individual judgment fails under stress, group accountability catches errors. The sagas emphasize collective survival over individual heroism for a reason isolation was death. Today, we eliminate discomfort instantly and call it progress. Central heating removes the need for thermal adaptation, so our bodies never learn to regulate efficiently. Constant food access removes metabolic flexibility, so we lose the ability to function in caloric deficit. Artificial light disrupts circadian discipline, so our sleep architecture fragments. We are warmer, better fed, and more illuminated than Vikings ever were, and we are more fragile. Comfort didn't make us stronger. It made us dependent on systems we don't control and can't repair. A Viking could lose their home and survive the winter in the forest with wool and fire. A modern human loses power for 3 days, and this situation becomes newsworthy. We've traded resilience for convenience, and we don't realize the exchange rate until the systems fail. The Vikings would look at our infrastructure and see catastrophic single points of failure everywhere. The Viking lesson is not to abandon modern comfort and live in the cold. It's to stop outsourcing regulation entirely. Resilience comes from controlled stress, not avoidance. Cold exposure trains vascular efficiency and metabolic flexibility. Routine trains executive function and emotional regulation. Caloric scarcity controlled. Temporary trains the body to access stored energy and function in deficit. Remove all 3 stresses completely, and resilience atrophies like an unused muscle. You don't need to survive a Scandinavian winter, but you need to practice the principles that made that survival possible. Expose yourself to cold water deliberately. Build routines that don't depend on motivation. Occasionally skip meals and observe how your body responds. These aren't punishments, they're training protocols. The Vikings didn't do these things because they enjoyed suffering. They did them because the alternative was worse. The Vikings didn't survive because they were fearless or genetically superior. They survived because they understood the limits of the human body and stayed inside them. They built systems that worked with biology, not against it. This channel studies those limits not through mythology or romanticization, but through the methods that worked when failure meant death. If that matters to you, stay.